The question we're going to be looking at in this video is about sentence boundaries. It and questions like it require you to be able to identify and fix sentence fragment errors. Sentence fragments occur when a sentence doesn't include an independent clause, that is, a clause with a subject and a verb that can stand on its own as a sentence. There will be 1 to 2 of these on your SAT. And those errors that you'll see come in several different flavors. The first is a clause made dependent by a subordinating conjunction. So let's look at an example of that. Although gold coins are very valuable, many people prefer the convenience of paper money. So that first sentence contains both a noun and a main verb, right? We've got coins, there's our noun, and are, that's our main verb. But the presence of the subordinating conjunction although turns it into a dependent clause. You can fix this error in a couple of ways. You could remove the period after valuable and change it into a comma, lowercase the m in many, and that would connect the dependent clause to the independent clause that follows it. You could also remove the although, replace the period after valuable with a comma, and insert a but before many, which would make it into 2 independent clauses connected to one another with a coordinating conjunction. Another type of sentence fragment is the unnecessary relative pronoun. Gray wolves, which were reintroduced to Yellowstone National Park in 1995. That which creates an unclear clause that looks like it's going to be a relative clause, but it then goes nowhere. So to fix this, we just want to remove the which. And now it's an independent clause. Gray wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone National Park in 1995. The third frequent kind of sentence fragment you'll see on the SAT is when a sentence is missing either a subject or a main verb. So, Vermont is home to many varieties of cheese. That's an independent clause, that's fine. Including cheddar, arguably the most famous Vermont cheese. Now that chunk beginning with including contains neither a subject nor a main verb. Including isn't attached to any nouns, it's just sort of a free-floating participle here. So to fix this error, we would want to convert the period after cheese into a comma in order to link this fragment up with the independent clause that precedes it. So with those 3 error types in mind, let's look at our passage. We start here. By regulating water flow in streams, period, dams have ripple effects that radiate to all surrounding organisms. So first we should ask, is this a sentence fragment? And if so, what type is it? So yes, it is. And I'd say it's a sentence fragment without a subject or a main verb. But if we replace the period after streams with a comma, we can turn by regulating water flow in streams into a dependent clause that describes the following independent clause. Dams have ripple effects. How do we know that second sentence is an independent clause? It's got a subject and a main verb. Dams and have, S and V, subject and verb. We don't need to think about that relative clause that radiate out to all surrounding organisms. We need to be able to quickly identify whether or not a sentence is a sentence, and that means hunting for a subject and a main verb. So anything else, whether it's comma-bound phrases or relative clauses, can be set aside and read around. So there you are, top tip, read around parentheticals or relative clauses. Sometimes a dependent clause might have a bunch of complicated looking relative clauses in it, but just because a clause looks complicated doesn't mean it can stand by itself as a sentence, so you really need to hunt for the subject and the verb. Another clue we have that this first sentence chunk is a fragment is that it lacks a main verb. It's got a participle, that ing verb in the form of regulating. But those verb forms need helper verbs or auxiliaries like is or has or had been. Which leads me to my second top tip. If you see an ing verb on its own without a helper, chances are you've got a sentence fragment. So we have everything we need to make our decision now. We know that this first clause is a sentence fragment, and that means that any choice that would cause it to behave like an independent clause, like a sentence on its own, is incorrect. And since we can't change the sentence in other places other than where it's been underlined, we're looking for the choice that simply replaces the period with a comma. And scanning the choices quickly, I can see that that is choice C. Let me go back through and explain why the other choices aren't right, though. So choice A, we've spent the last couple minutes establishing why it results in a sentence fragment, so I'm going to cross that off. Choice B does the same thing because it replaces that period with a semicolon. And since by regulating water flow in streams is a dependent clause, it can't use that semicolon. Only independent clauses can be connected by semicolons. And that M dash doesn't really work here for choice D. We're not introducing a parenthetical or an appositive, nor are we signaling an interrupted thought in dialogue. So I'm going to cross that off. C is our answer. So let's review. If you come across a sentence fragment, identify where the error is. So look out for dependent clauses pretending to be sentences, sentences with unnecessary relative pronouns, and sentence fragments that are missing a subject or a main verb. Once you've done that, then, number 2, make a prediction about how you'd fix that error. The other choices will retain the error. 3, read around comma-bound phrases or relative clauses in order to quickly identify independent and dependent clauses. And 4, watch out for ing verbs without helper or auxiliary verbs. That's going to be a very good hint as to whether or not you're looking at a sentence fragment.